Hey, I'm Alex with Guys Can Read. Today's book report is on Shogun by James Clavell. So, in middle school, if you're like me and got way too into accelerated reading, you probably read or at least came across Shogun because it was worth 1 billion AR points. But then I hear that Hulu is going to be doing a new adaptation. There were a couple adaptations. One came out in like the 70s, one a little bit later. But when I saw the Hulu news, I thought, oh, cool. And then the first trailer dropped. And holy shit, did this get me hyped up for this series. I decided to do what any sane person would do and binge read the book before the show's release date on February 27th, 2024. And as you may be able to guess by now, I finished the book, and damn. Like, not only is this a perfect book, but I think if it's done correctly, the show has the potential to rival Game of Thrones. Or at least the first 7 seasons. So, Shogun is a epic historical fiction that's set in Japan and is notorious for its length as well as the phenomenal story that it tells. We start our tale with the protagonist, James Blackthorne, who's an English ship captain working for the Dutch aboard the Erasmus, looking for, as all good sailors do, fame and fortune, specifically by navigating the Strait of Magellan and making his way to Asia. But after fate has its way, Blackthorne and the crew of the Erasmus are shipwrecked and end up on a little island nation far away from Europe called Japan, and specifically in the port city of Anjiro. Initially met with disgust, suspicion, and violence by the citizens of Anjiro and several of their samurai, Blackthorne ends up being remanded to the custody of a local daimyo named Yoshi Toranaga. Toranaga decides, with the help of Jesuit priests from Portugal, that Blackthorne is actually more useful alive to him than dead. And I'll lose you if I try to explain all the reasons for this narratively, but let's just say that there's a little bit of distrust between Toranaga and the representatives of the church who came from Portugal. And Toranaga has political ambitions that could be benefited from knowledge of Western warfare, naval proficiency, and trade routes between Europe and Asia, which Blackthorne has. As the book goes on, we're introduced by Blackthorne, who becomes known as Anjin-san, and Toranaga to a deep web of political intrigue currently gripping Japan. The previous Taiko, or ruler, has recently passed. His only male heir is too young to rule, and Toranaga, one of the 5 members of the Council of Regents, is the target of a plot by the other regents, including his political rival Ishido. Blackthorne's arrival then kicks off a chain of events, putting Toranaga and Ishido directly into competition with each other for control of Japan. The main cast of characters is rounded out by an ambitious Toranaga vassal named Yabu Kasigi, and a female Christian and samurai and translator, Mariko Akechi Jinzai, not to mention a whole mess of other samurais, spies, lords, ladies, priests, escorts, and ninjas. There's betrayal, greed, romance, affairs, guns, fights, naval battles, you name it. So you can see where Shogun starts to look like Game of Thrones. But given that Shogun came out in 1975, I guess it's really more that Game of Thrones looks a lot like Shogun. Reader beware, this is a long book. The print edition that I read of Shogun was split into 2 parts. The first was about 700 pages, and the second was 800, for a total of 1,500 pages, give or take. But trust me when I say that it was worth it. The way that Blackthorne, Toranaga, Mariko, Yabu, and Ishido, and all the other characters are developed over the course of the book is awesome. The most obvious of these examples is Blackthorne, who not only comes to learn how to speak and thrive in Japan, but actually ends up resenting a lot of European customs and culture after the end of the book. This development, the epic plot, and the fairly strong depictions of the action sequences wouldn't be possible if this book was shorter. The love that James Clavell has for these characters is obvious as he pours so much into them over the course of the book. At times, though, I felt myself suffering from the same problem that I did with the Game of Thrones series, A Song of Ice and Fire. Namely, that with so many characters and plots happening, you kind of forget who's who after a while. It's just kind of part and parcel for a book like this. Now, if you're a serious reader, I would recommend reading this in parallel with another book, maybe nonfiction, just for balance. But if you're in the few books a year category, I would probably recommend saving Shogun for a vacation or another period where you're going to be able to binge read it. So because the book was published in 1975, I want to highlight a couple critiques of it because, like a lot of I'm going to say older here, even though it's only been like 50 years. Like a lot of older works, this doesn't hold up well under certain lenses in the year of our Lord 2024. So first off, let's talk about fetishization. There is a lot of sex in this book. It's not smutty or overhyped per se, like modern romantasy novels. It's just a fact of the matter that the characters of Shogun have a lot of sex, or pillowing, as it's referred. With that comes courtesans, the ladies of the Willow world, and how ubiquitous they are in the story. The main examples of the courtesans in the world of Shogun are Kiku and Gyoko, who is the madam of the Enterprise, I guess you could call it, where Kiku works. Sidebar, there's a feminist angle you could take here, since Gyoko ends up leveraging her profession for power multiple times in the book and ends up kind of being a key figure, but we'll put that off till later. The euphemisms in this book, too, are ridiculous. A few times every 100 pages or so, we get names like the Divine Shaft, the Sacred Sword, the Heavenly Chasm, or Magical Crevice. I'll let your mind and interpretation figure out what each of those means. And I won't even get into the discussion of sex toys here. I don't know why Clavell felt it was necessary to include so much of this, but I'm not going to knock the guy for being a little horny. Underlying this, not all, but many of the women in Shogun end up being objectified, and I won't pretend to know it's historically accurate or not, but I agree with some of the critiques that Shogun at times paints 17th century Japan as a wonderful place to be a guy. It also over-indexes a bit on the divinity of the Japanese female, and third, it's just generally kind of cringy at times. One of the other two criticisms I saw crop up frequently was historical accuracy. For example, the critics said that seppuku, the art of ritual suicide, was nowhere near as common as Clavell made it seem. The third criticism that I saw was about the way that Japanese language was handled within the book. Inaccurate hyphens, names of characters written out, even certain Japanese translations being wrong were all points that I saw highlighted in criticisms of Shogun. Again, I don't know what's accurate, but as far as the Japanese language is concerned, I will say that Clavell is very heavy-handed with the use of like "ne," as well as "oh, so sorry." I read this enough times that it made me go insane a little bit, just how much Clavell used these phrases. I think he could have easily lightened up. Now, did any of this ruin or smudge the book for me? Fuck no. The plot, character arcs, and suspense were all so strong that I was focused on these rather than the depiction of Japan and its women, which you might get canceled for today, all due respect to Clavell. Alright, let's talk through a couple of my favorite quotes from Shogun. First off, always remember, child, that to think bad thoughts is really the easiest thing in the world. If you leave your mind to itself, it will spiral you down into ever-increasing unhappiness. To think good thoughts, however, requires effort. This is one of the things that discipline, training, is about. This is a quote from Gyoko to Kiku, I believe rather early in the book, and this holds up super well in 2024. There was a recent reel from the millennial economist, Kyla Scanlon, that talks about how hope requires imagination and imagination requires work. Very similar vibes. And I'll link to Kyla's blog post where she talks about that in the comments. Second quote. Men need to whisper secrets, lady. That's what makes them different from us. They need to share secrets, but we women only reveal them to gain an advantage. This is Gyoko talking to Mariko. I touched on this earlier, but Gyoko is one of my favorite characters in this book because while her profession as a madam in the world of samurai doesn't have a lot of glitz and glamour to it, she parlays her job into secrets and uses these secrets to gain power multiple times in the course of Shogun. This ends up working out very well for her. It's also very similar to how Peter Baelish or Littlefinger and Varys were treated and operated in Game of Thrones. Third quote. Patience means holding back your inclination to the 7 emotions: hate, adoration, joy, anxiety, anger, grief, and fear. If you don't give way to the 7, you're patient. Then you'll soon understand all manner of things and be in harmony with eternity. This is Toranaga speaking to Blackthorn, and big stoic guy, that Toranaga. I'm pretty into it. This goes back to the Gyoko quote about negative emotions. I've seen a lot of people, and I have myself, started spiraling due to fear. What's going to happen? Is so-and-so mad at me? Why is my boss asking for a 5-minute chat? When really, patience is the ability to outlast and overcome fear, simply waiting for the thing to happen rather than getting anxious about it. Now, with the quote itself, we do kind of see Clavell romanticizing Japanese philosophy, which his depiction of it may or may not be accurate. But, you know, if romanticizing philosophy is wrong, I don't want to be right. All right, and finally, should you read Shogun by James Clavell? So if you're a fan of historical fiction, I'm giving this a hard recommend. Like I said earlier, in my mind, this is a perfect book. The fiction, sure, might weigh heavier than the historical at times, but this is the first historical fiction I've read in a while, and I simply loved it. If you liked Game of Thrones or generally like intrigue, espionage, manipulation, 48 Laws of Power kind of stuff, I would say absolutely you should read this. There's a ton of that suspense layered in throughout the book. But if you're in the handful of books per year category that I described, I would maybe think twice about reading Shogun. For some people, I would say you could probably spend a year reading Shogun. Or in that year, you could read 3 to 4 other books, which are shorter. And there you have it. That's Shogun by James Clavell. As always, thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to the Guys Can Read channel on YouTube, follow us on Instagram at Guys Can Read, and fill out the Google form if you would like to join a Guys Can Read book club discussion in your city. See you next time.